I should have known that baggy clothes weren't a solution, they were just a delay. The wedding was beautiful. I hated that. I stood at the edge of the Santoro estate's marble terrace, watching the ceremony unfold in that old Roman chapel that Marco's family had owned for 3 generations. The bride was radiant. The groom looked like he'd signed a contract with the devil himself, which, considering Matteo Cavalli's reputation, he probably had. I wasn't supposed to be here. My friend Lucia had begged me to come as her +1, and I'd agreed before I remembered that the Cavalli-Santoro wedding would draw every dangerous man in the city. I'd worn the loosest white dress I could find, something my grandmother might have chosen for church, and kept my posture curved inward, trying to fold myself smaller. It hadn't worked so far. 3 weeks of hiding had been relatively successful. 3 weeks of loose knitwear, strategic layering, and avoiding the mirror. 3 weeks of pretending the fluttering in my stomach was anxiety instead of a life I wasn't ready to carry. Julia. Lucia appeared beside me, flushed with wine and joy. Why are you hiding out here? You look like you're going to dissolve. I'm just tired. I lied. The ceremony was beautiful. I wanted some air. She squeezed my hand and disappeared back into the reception, leaving me alone with my secret and the October wind that smelled like expensive perfume and cigarette smoke. The terrace overlooked the manicured gardens, all shadows and carefully placed light. I could see stone fountains, the glint of champagne glasses being carried past the windows, and then movement in the garden below that made my breath catch. A man, walking alone. I recognized him immediately, because you didn't live in this city without learning the shape of Matteo Cavalli's shoulders, the way he moved like something dangerous forced into the shape of a man. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. His dark hair caught the light from the party above. He was alone, and he was walking toward the terrace, toward me. I turned away instinctively, gripping the stone railing, and that's when it happened. The nausea, the relentless, predictable nausea that had become my unwelcome companion, suddenly demanded to be acknowledged. My stomach twisted, my throat tightened. I barely made it to the hedged corner before I was sick, unable to contain it anymore, unable to hide even this. When I straightened up, eyes watering, I felt rather than saw him step onto the terrace. That's not typically how women react to my brother's wedding. His voice was low, amused, dangerous in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. I turned to face him, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand like an idiot, and found Matteo Cavalli watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He was more handsome in person than in the grainy photos Lucia sometimes showed me. Darker eyes, more dangerous. The kind of face that made you understand why old families trusted him with empire. "I'm fine," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. "Something I ate." "You're lying." He stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, completely at ease. "And you're terrified." I can smell it underneath the perfume. My heart slammed against my ribs. He couldn't know. There was no way he could possibly. "Who are you?" he asked. "Julia Moretti." I gave my mother's surname, the one that had no connections, no weight. "I came with Lucia Santoro." He nodded slowly, as if filing away information. His eyes moved over me, and I felt it like a touch, clinical, assessing, thorough. They caught on the looseness of my dress, the way I was holding myself. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. The world did something strange. It tilted. My vision tunneled. I watched his face as he said the words, watched the moment they landed, and I understood with perfect, shattering clarity that the thing I'd been trying to hide had just been seen by the most dangerous man in the city. "No, You were sick. You're hiding your body. Your eyes have that particular exhaustion that comes from early pregnancy." He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was a problem he was considering how to solve. "So let me ask you again, Julia Moretti, and I suggest you be honest with me. Who's the father, and where is he?" The silence stretched between us. The party continued behind the glass doors, laughter, music, the clink of glasses. A normal world that had suddenly become inaccessible. "That's not your concern," I whispered. Matteo Cavalli smiled, and it was the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. "Everything in this city is my concern, Piccola, and you just became very interesting to me." I didn't see him again for 4 days, and it was the longest 4 days of my life. After that night, I'd left the wedding immediately. I'd found Lucia inside, flushed and happy, none the wiser, and told her I was sick. Technically, it was true. She'd believed me without question, and I'd driven home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my mind replaying that moment when he'd seen me, when he'd known. I'd spent the intervening days in my apartment, pretending to work while actually accomplishing nothing. My freelance graphic design work sat untouched on my computer. The apartment that had felt like a sanctuary for the past month now felt like a very small room with very visible walls. On the fourth day, someone knocked on my door. I didn't answer it. I sat on my couch with my hand on my stomach, a gesture that had become unconscious, protective, and waited for them to go away. They didn't. Miss Moretti, a male voice called through the door. Professional, polite, absolutely terrifying. Mr. Cavalli would like to speak with you. It's in your best interest to open this door. My stomach churned. Not from pregnancy this time, from pure fear. I'm not interested in speaking with anyone, I called back. I'm afraid that wasn't a request. I opened the door to find a man in an expensive suit, large and unmistakably armed, standing in my hallway with the casual confidence of someone who had never been told no. Mr. Cavalli is waiting downstairs, he said. The car is parked in front of your building. You can come willingly, or I can carry you. He prefers the first option, but he's accommodating either way. The walk down to the street was the longest of my life. My neighbors peeked through their doors as I passed. I was sure this would be the talk of the building for weeks. The quiet girl who kept to herself, being escorted into a black car that screamed money and danger. The car itself was a Maybach, all tinted glass and leather. Matteo Cavalli sat in the back seat with a newspaper in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, looking like he had nowhere else to be, and all the time in the world to be there. Julia, he said, setting both items aside. Thank you for coming. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. You simply don't like the alternatives. He gestured to the seat across from him. Sit. I sat, unable to do anything else. The car began moving immediately, and I realized with a spike of panic that I didn't know where we were going. I've had my people ask some discreet questions about you, he said casually. Julia Moretti, 26 years old, daughter of Sofia and Riccardo Moretti. Your father was a carpenter. Your mother is a teacher. You have no connections to any family, any organization, any criminal enterprise. I stayed silent. You work from home. You don't go out much. And until recently, you had a boyfriend. A man named Paolo Gianni, who works in finance and left the city 3 weeks ago. He paused. For Toronto. My hands curled into fists on my lap. He doesn't know, I said quietly. I didn't tell him. Matteo was quiet for a moment, and when I looked up, his expression had shifted into something harder to read. He left without knowing he'd fathered a child. It wasn't like that. It was complicated. We weren't together long, and when I realized, he'd already accepted a job offer. His entire family was moving. I couldn't just ruin his life, so instead you're ruining yours. It wasn't cruel, the way he said it. It was just matter of fact, like he was stating something obvious. You're alone. You're terrified. You're hiding in your apartment. How I handle this is my business. Not anymore. The car turned a corner, and I pressed myself against the window, trying to see where we were. Matteo continued as if I hadn't spoken. You have approximately 5 months before this pregnancy becomes obvious to anyone with eyes. Before then, you'll need money for medical care, a plan for the birth, somewhere safe to give birth. You'll need support. Instead, you have nothing but secrets and baggy clothes. I have savings, which you're too afraid to spend because you're trying to pretend this isn't happening. His voice remained calm, but something in his tone had shifted. It was like listening to someone describe an illness they'd already diagnosed. You're pretending so hard that you're making yourself sick. The pregnancy is real, Julia. Hiding won't change that. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him this wasn't his concern, that I could handle it myself, that I didn't need his help or his judgment or his terrifying presence in my life. Instead, I started to cry. I didn't want to. The tears came anyway, silent and humiliating, streaming down my face while Matteo Cavalli watched me with those dark eyes that somehow seemed to see everything. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "My estate. You'll stay there until we figure out how to handle this situation." "I won't." "You will," he said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Because despite your independence and your fear, you're going to realize that you need help, and I'm the only option that keeps you safe." He reached across the space between us and wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. The gesture was startlingly gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Welcome to your new life, Piccola," he said softly. "Try not to fight it too much." The estate was larger than most hotels. I stood in the entrance hall, my small overnight bag looking ridiculous in my hands, and tried to process the scale of it. Marble floors that reflected chandeliers, a staircase that curved like something from a period film, oil paintings of men who looked like Matteo stern-faced, dangerous men whose eyes followed you across the room. "This is insane," I said quietly. "This is practical," Matteo corrected. He'd removed his suit jacket, and his white dress shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms marked with a scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "The cook will prepare whatever you need. There's a medical suite on the 3rd floor with a doctor on call. You'll have your own wing. Your own wing of a mansion, because you've decided to adopt my pregnancy. I've decided to manage a situation." He gestured to the older woman who'd appeared silently beside him. "This is Antonella. She'll help you settle in and answer any questions you have about the house." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to walk out, call a cab, disappear back into my apartment and my hiding. But standing in that entrance hall, I felt the weight of what Matteo had said in the car. I had nothing. I had secrets. I had fear. And in perhaps 20 weeks, I would have a baby. So I followed Antonella up the curved staircase. My wing was absurdly luxurious, a bedroom with a 4-poster bed, a sitting area with a fireplace, a bathroom with a soaking tub, and a small office. Fresh flowers sat on every surface. Someone had thought about comfort. "Mr. Cavalli had this wing prepared for guests," Antonella explained. She was perhaps 60, with kind eyes and the air of someone who had seen things in this house that would terrify most people. "Is there anything you need tonight?" "I need this to not be happening," I said. She smiled sadly. "Most people feel that way when they first arrive." "You'll adjust." I doubted that very much. Alone in the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed and put my head in my hands. This was kidnapping. This was a crime. I should call the police, should tell someone, should refuse to be here. And yet, the thought of going back to my apartment, to my isolation, to the crushing weight of my secret, that felt worse. I changed into the nightgown Antonella had left for me and lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere below, I could hear footsteps, voices. The estate had a staff, a structure, an entire infrastructure that ran on systems I didn't understand. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke to sunlight and the smell of fresh coffee. Breakfast was laid out in a small dining room off the main kitchen. Toast, fruit, cheese, pastries, fresh juice. Antonella poured tea for me without asking and watched while I ate, her expression satisfied. "The doctor will see you this afternoon," she said. "Mr. Cavalli arranged it." "Of course he did. You should be grateful," Antonella said mildly. "He doesn't usually take an interest in situations." "What situations?" I set down my tea. "What exactly does he do? Beyond the obvious organized crime?" Antonella's expression didn't change. "That would be Mr. Cavalli's story to tell." I was still thinking about that non-answer when Matteo appeared in the doorway several hours later. He'd changed since yesterday, tailored black trousers, a black shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like something that walked out of expensive danger. "The doctor confirmed everything," he said without preamble. "You're healthy. The baby is healthy. You're approximately 11 weeks along. How do you—" I stopped. Of course. He'd had someone report to him. "You've invaded my privacy. I've ensured your well-being." He pulled out a chair and sat across from me, and I was struck by how intimate it felt, just the two of us at this table in this enormous house. "The doctor will visit weekly. You need prenatal vitamins, proper nutrition, rest. Your stress levels need to decrease significantly." My stress levels increased when you kidnapped me. I invited you here under circumstances you felt unable to refuse, he said, and his tone suggested he was splitting hairs he believed were important. It's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Then you're free to leave whenever you'd like, he said, and something in his eyes told me this was a test. Go back to your apartment. Sit alone with your secret. Wait for it to show. Try to figure out the birth plan on your own. Try to raise this child without support or resources. I didn't respond. That's what I thought, he said softly. He stood to leave, and I found myself speaking before I could stop myself. Why are you doing this? He paused at the doorway. In profile, with the afternoon light catching his face, I could see something in his expression that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't softness. Matteo Cavalli didn't seem capable of softness. But there was something beneath the control, beneath the dangerous composure. Because, he said, I have power, and you have none. And in this city, that's the only relationship that matters. He left before I could respond. That night, I sat in my room and tried to understand the man who had taken my life hostage. I learned things by asking Antonella careful questions. That Matteo Cavalli's family had built their empire over 4 generations, that he'd taken control at 28 after his father's death, that he was known for being ruthless but honorable, for keeping his word, for never striking first but always striking last. He was, essentially, a king in the underworld, and I was his sudden, unexpected concern. The rationalization told me this was transactional, that he liked control, liked the idea of having someone depend on him, and I was simply the current vehicle for that impulse. But the small, frightened part of me that had given up fighting the current whispered something different. It whispered that maybe, for the first time since Paolo had left, I wasn't alone. 2 weeks into my captivity residence, Matteo insisted on calling it I tried to leave. I'd been careful about it. I'd waited until afternoon, when I'd seen Matteo's car leave the drive. I'd taken the bag of clothes that had been brought to me and walked down to the gates. They were locked, electronically. And when I pressed the intercom button, a voice I didn't recognize answered. I'm afraid Mr. Cavalli's instructions are that you're not to leave, the voice said politely. I stood there for 15 minutes, rage and helplessness warring inside me, before I turned and walked back to the house. Matteo was waiting for me in the sitting room, calm as always, a cup of espresso in his hand. Don't do that again, he said. You're holding me prisoner. I'm keeping you safe. Those aren't mutually exclusive, I spat. And I didn't consent to any of this. No, he agreed. You didn't, but you also didn't object as strenuously as you might have. Somewhere inside you, you knew you needed this. I needed my freedom. I needed my life back. Your life was ending, he interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. You were ending it by inches, hiding in your apartment, pretending a pregnancy wouldn't exist if you didn't acknowledge it. I saved you from that, without asking. Would you have accepted if I had? The answer was no, and we both knew it. I turned away from him, furious and trapped, and something worse, something that felt like gratitude, which made me hate myself. 3 days later, my mother called. I was in the medical suite, my second weekly checkup, when my phone buzzed. I hadn't answered any calls since arriving at the estate, but seeing my mother's name on the screen, I picked up without thinking. Julia, finally, where have you been? I've been so worried. I'm fine, Mama. I'm staying with a friend for a few weeks. Which friend? I called Lucia and she said you left the wedding early 3 weeks ago. I didn't even know you were sick. I'm fine, I said again, knowing it sounded hollow. Just a little overwhelmed with work. I needed some space. You're my daughter. You're alone. You should come home. Come to the house. Your father misses you. The phone was gently taken from my hand. Matteo stood beside me, phone pressed to his ear, his expression composed. Mrs. Moretti, this is Matteo Cavalli. Your daughter is safe and well cared for. She's staying here temporarily to rest. She'll contact you when she's ready to resume her normal life. I couldn't hear her response, but I could imagine it, her shock, her outrage, the moment she realized what had happened. That would be unwise, Matteo said quietly, and something in his voice made clear that whatever my mother had threatened, she should reconsider. Your daughter is exactly where she needs to be. I suggest you trust my judgment on this. He ended the call. You had no right. Your mother was going to call the police. He handed the phone back to me. That would have complicated things. My mother has every right. Your mother has no power in this situation, he said flatly. And neither do you. The question is whether you'll accept that, or whether you'll continue to waste energy fighting it. And what about my freedom? What about my choice? He stepped closer, and I realized I'd backed up without noticing it, until my hips pressed against the medical bed behind me. This close, I could see the dark ring around his irises, the slight shadow on his jaw from a day's worth of stubble. You had a choice, he said softly. You chose Paolo. You chose to hide the consequences. You chose to be alone. And when that choice was going to destroy you, you chose to stay here rather than fight harder to leave. He reached up, his hand brushing my hair back from my face, a gesture that should have felt controlling but somehow felt almost tender. Every choice has led you to exactly where you are, Piccola. And I think, somewhere inside you, you're relieved. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that this was coercion, that relief couldn't exist in a prison. But I said nothing. Later, alone in my room, I realized I'd stopped fighting the gates. I'd stopped trying to call for help. I'd begun unconsciously, without noticing, to become someone who lived in this estate, who waited for Matteo's appearances like they mattered, who felt something tighten in my chest when I heard his car in the drive. That night, I heard sirens in the distance. Multiple sirens, converging on something nearby. I went to my window and watched as several police cars raced past the gates. Antonella brought dinner later, her expression slightly more somber than usual. There was trouble in the Rossi territory, she said carefully. A bombing. Several men dead. Matteo? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, and realized something that terrified me, more than the gates or the guards or the isolation. I was afraid for him. Not of him, for him. The walls had closed, but not in the way I'd expected. I was trapped not by doors and gates, but by the slow, terrifying pull of someone else's gravity. Matteo returned to the estate with a wound. I didn't know about it until the following morning, when I passed by a room I'd been avoiding his office, and saw him sitting behind a desk with his shirt off, while Antonella carefully taped gauze across his ribs. I froze in the doorway. It's fine, he said without looking at me. Bullet grazed me. Nothing serious. That's a lot of blood for nothing serious, I said quietly. Antonella excused herself with practiced discretion, and Matteo finally turned to look at me. There was exhaustion in his face that I hadn't seen before, and something darker underneath it, something that looked like violence recently indulged. You heard about the bombing, he said. It wasn't a question. Antonella mentioned it, and you were afraid I was dead. I should have lied. I should have pretended I didn't care, that his safety was irrelevant to me. Instead, I said, yes. Something shifted in his expression. He stood moving carefully, holding his ribs, and walked toward me. I didn't back away. You need to understand something, he said. This life doesn't have safe endings. The Rossi family made a move against my territory. 3 of their men are dead. 2 of mine are dead. This is the cost of power. And the cost of being near you. I whispered. Yes. He didn't soften it. He didn't try to make it palatable or less true. He just stated it plainly, and I realized that was more honest than any lie he could have told me. I'm pregnant, I said. If something happens to you, nothing will happen to me. He reached out, his injured hand careful as it cupped my cheek. But if it did, you're safe here. You have resources. You have protection that extends beyond my life. I don't want your protection. I stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. I want you to be safe. I want this to be simple. I want to not feel like I'm drowning in you. You want this to be different, he finished for me. But it's not. After that, everything changed in ways I didn't understand. Matteo began spending time in the spaces I occupied. He'd appear in the sitting room while I read, settling into a chair with his laptop or documents, working in companionable silence. He'd join me for meals instead of eating elsewhere. He'd sit in the courtyard while I walked, keeping a respectful distance but present, a constant gravitational pull that I'd stopped trying to escape. At night, I'd hear him moving through the house, footsteps on the marble floors, voices and conversations I couldn't quite make out. Once, I heard raised voices, then gunshots somewhere distant, and then silence. He returned to the house, smelling like smoke, and something else I didn't want to identify. I was learning the shape of his days, the rhythm of his life. I was learning that Matteo Cavalli was someone who carried weight. I couldn't imagine decisions that affected hundreds of people. Enemies who wanted him dead, a world that existed underneath the one I'd been raised in. "Tell me something," I said one afternoon. We were in the library, and I was supposed to be resting, but sleep had become difficult. He was reading something in Italian, a contract. From the looks of it. "Why did you really bring me here?" He lowered the document. "You already know why. The pregnancy? The safety argument? That doesn't feel like the whole truth." He set the document down carefully. "When I saw you on that terrace, you were the first thing in months that wasn't connected to the empire. You were soft. You were innocent. You were..." He paused, searching for the word. "Separate. From all of this, and now you're connected to everything I am." He gestured around the library. "You're wearing my clothes. You're living in my house. You're carrying a child whose paternity has become irrelevant because you belong to my protection now. That doesn't mean I belong to you, doesn't it?" He stood, and I realized he was moving toward me with purpose. I didn't run. He sat beside me on the sofa, careful to maintain distance but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "You could leave any time you want, Julia. The gates aren't locked anymore. You haven't tried to escape in 3 weeks. You eat my food. You sleep in my house. You have a doctor I provided for. You've stopped calling your parents. You've, for all practical purposes, surrendered to this situation. I'm trapped. You're safe," he corrected. "But more than that, you're no longer alone. Somewhere inside you, you know that matters." My chest felt tight. "This isn't love. You can't make this into something it's not. I'm not trying to make it into anything." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "I'm simply observing what already is." And the terrible, honest truth was that he was right. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, being here had shifted from imprisonment to something I'd stopped fighting. Somewhere in the watches of the night, when I heard him moving through his empire, protecting people, making decisions that cost lives, I'd started to care if he came back. "When will you make me leave?" I asked quietly. He opened one eye. "When you ask me to. And if I never ask, then you never leave." The certainty in his voice should have terrified me. Instead, it did something worse. It filled me with a complicated relief that felt like surrender. The confession came on a night when the city was quiet. We were sitting in the courtyard, something we did most evenings now, when the weather allowed. I was 17 weeks along, and the pregnancy was becoming impossible to hide anymore. My clothes were tighter, my body was changing, and Matteo had stopped pretending not to notice. "Tell me about him," he said. Just like that, no preamble. "Paolo?" "Yes." I should have refused. But the night was soft, and I was tired of keeping it inside. "He was kind," I said slowly. "Not exciting, but kind. We met at university. We'd been together for 2 years, when he got the job offer in Toronto. He was so happy about it. His whole family was moving, and a week after he told me, I found out I was pregnant. You didn't tell him. He had this whole future planned. A promotion, a house, his family close by, and I was going to blow up his entire life. I was going to be the girl who trapped him. I looked down at my hands, so I didn't tell him. You sacrificed yourself. I made a choice. You made a choice based on fear," Matteo said quietly. "Just like you're doing now. This is different." "Is it?" He turned to face me fully. "You're afraid of me. You're afraid of what this is. So you're trying to minimize it. To pretend you have more control than you do." "I don't know what you want from me," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't want anything from you except your honesty." He reached across the space between us, his fingers brushing my jaw. "I want you to stop lying to yourself about how you feel about being here, about being with me. I can't feel anything for you. This is coercion. This is circumstance. And yes, I created the circumstance, but you could have left a dozen times and you haven't. His thumb traced my cheekbone. Do you know why? I didn't answer. Because underneath the fear, underneath the argument, there's something else. Something that's been growing since the night I found you sick on that terrace. Admit it. I can't. You can. You're just terrified. Of course I'm terrified. The words came out like a sob. I'm terrified of you. I'm terrified of this house. I'm terrified of the way I feel when you're not here. I'm terrified of needing you. I'm terrified that I've somehow fallen into a situation I can't control, and that I don't even want to escape anymore, and that makes me weak and stupid. And he kissed me. It wasn't violent or demanding. It was just sudden, his hand tilting my face up, his mouth meeting mine with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about him. For a moment, I froze. Then something inside me fractured, and I was kissing him back, my hands gripping his shirt, months of repressed feeling pouring out in that single point of contact. When he pulled away, my eyes were closed. You're not weak, he said softly. You're just finally being honest. This is insane. We barely know each other. I know you better than anyone alive. I know your fears. I know your secrets. I know the exact moment your resistance started to crack. He brushed my hair back from my face. I know that you're afraid of being alone more than you're afraid of me. That's not fair. It's not meant to be. He stood, helping me up. His ribs were healed now, the wound nothing but a line of new skin. Come inside. It's getting cold. We walked through the house without touching, but the energy between us had shifted into something charged and dangerous. He'd admitted his obsession. I'd admitted my need, and somewhere in the acknowledgement, the last barrier had fallen away. That night, I heard him in the hallway outside my door. His footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was silence. Then they continued, and I heard him move toward his own room, and I realized he was denying what I could feel him wanting. It made him more real, somehow, the restraint. More human. More someone I could actually care about instead of just this force of nature that had entered my life. I lay in the dark and pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling the faint flutter of movement that might have been the baby, or might have been my own nervous system. Your father is the most dangerous man I know, I whispered to it. And I think I might be falling in love with him. Saying it out loud made it real in a way I couldn't take back. The next morning, Matteo was gone when I came down for breakfast. There was a note beside my plate in his careful handwriting. Business in Milano. 3 days. Doors are unlocked. You're free to leave. I trust you won't. Antonella watched my face as I read it. He's given you a choice, she said. I could have left. I should have left. Instead, I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket. And when Matteo returned 3 days later, I was still there. We didn't talk about it for 2 weeks. The tension built in the spaces between conversations, in the way his hand would hover near the small of my back but never quite touch, in the careful distance he maintained that I was slowly, deliberately, closing. I was 21 weeks along. The baby was real now in a way it hadn't been before, a visible, undeniable presence. I could feel movement, small flutters that were becoming more pronounced. I'd started showing, my body reshaping itself into something unfamiliar, and Matteo watched this transformation with an intensity that made my breath catch. It was a Tuesday when everything crystallized. I was in the library, supposedly reading, actually tracing the edge of a water glass with my finger and thinking about how much I wanted him to touch me, when he entered. You're thinking very loudly, he said. I'm thinking about the fact that you kissed me 2 weeks ago and haven't come near me since. He paused in the act of setting down his briefcase. You need to be sure this is what you want. I'm sure. You're vulnerable. You're alone. You're dependent on me for survival. Those are terrible reasons to want someone. Maybe they are, I said, standing up. The movement made me dizzy, something the pregnancy had added to my collection of indignities. He reached out to steady me, his hand on my arm. But I want you anyway. Not because I'm dependent on you, because even knowing everything you are, everything you do, I want you. He pulled me closer, until we were separated by inches. This close, I could see the faint scar on his temple, the exact shade of brown in his eyes. If I touch you, he said quietly, I'm not going to stop. You understand that? I nodded. Say it. I understand. He kissed me with less restraint this time, his hand moving to the back of my neck, pulling me against him. I felt his other hand at my waist, careful around the swollen curve of my stomach, and something about that tenderness, that acknowledgement that I was carrying a child, that this complicated everything, made my eyes burn with unexpected tears. He pulled back. "Are you all right?" "Yes." I touched his face, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Yes, I'm just emotional, I know." He led me from the library, his hand never breaking contact with mine, down the hallway I'd come to know intimately, up the stairs to his room. His bedroom was larger than my entire apartment. A bed that could fit 5 people, windows that overlooked the city. And Mateo, closing the door behind us with the finality of a decision made. "Tell me if anything hurts," he said. "The only thing that hurts is wanting you, and not having you." He undressed me slowly, carefully, his hands reverent as they moved over skin that was no longer entirely mine. The pregnancy had changed my body in ways I'd resented, but the way he looked at me like I was something precious, something to be protected and worshipped simultaneously, made me reclaim ownership of myself. "You're beautiful," he said. "I'm swollen and stretched and beautiful," he repeated, and kissed the curve where my breast met my ribs. Completely, entirely, mine. I didn't argue about the possession in those words. I was past arguing. I was past pretending that I didn't belong to this moment, to him, to the terrifying vulnerability of being wanted by someone so powerful. When he moved inside me, it was slow, careful not to hurt the baby, careful not to overwhelm me, just a series of moments that built and built until I couldn't tell where he ended and I began. It wasn't the sex I'd read about in books or seen in movies. It was quieter than that, more profound. It was him holding me, protecting me even while we were as close as 2 people could be. It was my tears soaking into his shoulder, my whispered confessions into his neck, my hands gripping him like he was the only real thing left in the world. Afterward, we lay tangled together, his arm across my waist, his hand splayed across the curve of my belly. The baby kicked stronger now, impossible to ignore, and I felt him go very still. "The baby?" he said softly. "The baby," I confirmed. He pressed his mouth to my stomach, and the tenderness of the gesture undid something inside me. He was holding my child, a child that had nothing to do with him biologically, a child that was a reminder of another man, another life, another version of me, and he was treating it like it was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. "I should tell you something," I whispered. He looked up at me. "I love you. Not because I'm trapped here, not because you saved me, but because somewhere in the past 2 months, I fell in love with you." He moved back up to my face, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I was terrified he'd been playing some game, that this meant nothing to him, that I'd surrendered to something one-sided. Then he kissed my forehead, my cheek, my mouth, and said, "I know. That's not what you're supposed to say. You're right. I should tell you that I love you too. That the moment I saw you on that terrace, I became obsessed with you. That bringing you here was never about protection, it was about making sure you could never leave. That's still not romantic. I'm not a romantic man, Piccola." He pulled me closer. "But I'm yours, and you're mine. And that baby is going to grow up in a world where he or she is protected by everyone who loves me. That's the best I can offer you. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the fairy tale I might have wanted once. But it was real, and it was ours. And in that moment, it was enough." The phone call came at 3 a.m. I woke to Mateo answering it, his voice sharp with command, and immediately knew something was wrong. I lay very still in the dark and listened to him a series of clipped Italian phrases, then English. "How many? Where? 20 minutes. He hung up and turned to me. Even in the darkness, I could see the shift in him, the tender man who'd held me through the night transformed back into something dangerous. "There's trouble," he said, and I heard the old imperatives in his voice. "Stay in this room. Don't open the door for anyone but me." "Mateo." "I mean it, Julia." He dressed in the dark and was gone before I could respond. I lay in bed, my heart racing, my hands pressed to my stomach, feeling the baby respond to my panic with agitated movements. Something was happening. Something was breaking into our world. I heard it about 30 minutes later, the sound of cars arriving at the estate, multiple vehicles, the muffled voices of men. I went to the window and looked out onto the courtyard to see vehicles I didn't recognize. Men with guns. The entire peaceful sanctuary transformed into something militaristic and dangerous. Then I heard the gunshots. Not distant, not far away. Close, coming from inside the house. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The baby was kicking frantically, responding to my terror, and I found myself whispering reassurances that I didn't believe. It's okay. Your father is strong. He'll protect us. But what if he didn't come back? The thought paralyzed me. The same thought that had struck me in the medical suite, amplified 1,000-fold. What if Matteo Cavalli, who had become my entire world, didn't come back? The gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I stood at the window, staring out into the darkness, unable to move, unable to think. When the door to the bedroom opened, I nearly screamed. Matteo stood in the doorway, covered in blood. Oh God. I moved toward him without thinking. Are you hurt? Are you? It's not mine, he said, his voice hollow. Most of it isn't mine. I grabbed his face, searching for injuries, and found only a shallow cut along his temple. What happened? What was... The Moretti family. His hands came up to grip my arms, his eyes dark and fixed on me. They came for you. The words didn't make sense. For me? But Your father made some poor financial decisions. He owed money to people you don't want to owe money to. They decided you'd be valuable leverage. He pulled me against his chest, and I felt him shaking, actual shaking beneath the blood and the danger. They came here to take you, but we're not connected. I'm not. You're mine, he said roughly. You've been mine since the moment I brought you here, and anyone who touches what's mine deals with consequences. I pulled back to look at him. His jaw was tight, his eyes holding that empty quality of someone who had just done something terrible and would do it again without hesitation. How many? I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. You have to turn yourself in. I have to do nothing. He pulled back, releasing me to move to the shower. My lawyer is already handling it. Witnesses will say it was self-defense. The Moretti family attacked my estate with armed men. I was protecting my property. My property. That's what I was. That's all I would ever be to him. The thought should have broken my heart. Instead, it steadied something inside me. Because I understood, in that moment, that love and possession weren't opposites in his world. Possession was love. Control was devotion. The violence he'd committed was his way of saying, I matter to me as much as you matter to yourself. When he came out of the shower, I helped him examine the wound on his temple. It was deep enough that it needed stitches. I found the medical kit that apparently existed in every room and carefully closed it while he sat very still, watching me work. You're not leaving, he said. Not a question. No. You could. You could turn me in right now. Tell the police everything. You wouldn't be the first woman to. No, I said again. I tied off the final stitch and met his eyes. I'm not leaving because you're right. I'm yours. More than that. You're mine, and anyone who tries to hurt you will have to get through me. He pulled me down to his lap, careful of his injuries, and held me like I was the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. Our baby is going to grow up in a world of violence, he said quietly. Our baby is going to grow up in a world of protection, I corrected. There's a difference. We sat like that until the sun came up, and I realized that I'd crossed a threshold I couldn't uncross. I'd chosen this life fully not because I was trapped, but because I loved him more than I feared the consequences. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. I watched from my room as Matteo navigated the aftermath of the attack. Police visits, lawyer consultations, meetings with people whose faces I never saw but whose voices I heard on late-night phone calls. The story held self-defense, home invasion, the Moretti family attempting a kidnapping, but I could see the cost wearing on him. My father called during the investigation. Julia, he said, and his voice was smaller than I remembered. The police came to our house. They're saying we owe money to dangerous people. I don't understand. You made poor financial decisions, I said quietly. I was in the library, in that golden hour of late afternoon, when the whole house seemed to hold its breath. You gambled. You lost. And some people decided I was worth collecting. There was silence on the other end of the line. "I'm safe now," I continued. "And I'm going to make sure you're safe too. But you need to understand that your problems are my problems. And my problems are Matteo's problems. And Matteo solves his problems permanently." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Matteo Cavalli has decided to protect our family. Not because he likes us. Not because he cares about you at all. But because he cares about me. And I love you." I paused. "You should be grateful, Papa. You're alive because of that love." When I hung up, Matteo was standing in the doorway. "You're very efficient," he said. "You're very efficient at solving things. I'm just learning from you." He crossed the room and kissed the top of my head. I was 28 weeks now, heavy and tired, and sometimes unable to find a comfortable position for more than an hour. He'd gotten used to sleeping half propped up so I could lie against his chest without putting weight on my swollen stomach. "You could have left during all of this," he said. "While the investigation was happening, while everything was unstable, I would have let you go." "Would you have, though?" "Probably not," he admitted. "But I would have tried to." "Then it's good I didn't ask." The investigation closed without charges. The official story held. And somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery, Matteo's influence ensured that the Moretti family's money problems got worse, that their territory contracted, that there would be no second attempt on me. It was elegant, vicious, and utterly merciless. "Don't you feel guilty?" I asked him one night. "For what you did to them?" "No," he said simply. "They tried to use you as a bargaining chip. They would have hurt you if I'd hesitated. Guilt is a luxury I can't afford. That's a terrible way to live." "Yes," he agreed. "But it's the only way to survive in this world." I thought about that a lot in the following weeks. About the cost of his power, the things he'd done and would do again, the blood that would forever be on his hands because he'd chosen to protect me. "I want to talk about the future," I said when I was 35 weeks along. The baby could come any time now. I was enormous, uncomfortable, and somehow more secure than I'd ever been. All right, we were in the courtyard, and the night was cool. Matteo had brought a blanket because I'd complained about the cold, and now he was sitting beside me with one arm around my shoulders, his hand resting against my stomach where the baby pressed against his palm. "When the baby comes," I said, "what happens?" "We have a child. Together? You understand the baby is Paolo's, biologically. That will always be. This child will be mine," he said with absolute certainty. "In every way that matters, biologically, legally, spiritually, I will claim it as my own, and no one in this city will argue the point. And me? What am I?" He turned to face me fully. "You're the woman I love. You're the woman I've kept. You're the woman I'm going to marry." I hadn't expected that. Despite everything, the possession, the obsession, the way he controlled every aspect of my life, I hadn't expected marriage. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He pulled a ring from his pocket, something that looked old and expensive and absolutely not something he'd just happened to have. "I want to. I want this to be official. I want everyone to know that you belong to me and I belong to you." I looked at the ring. It was beautiful. In an understated way, a single diamond set in white gold, with intricate scrollwork on the band. "Where did you get this?" "My mother wore it," he said quietly. "She died when I was young, but I kept her ring. I want it on your hand." It was the most intimate thing he'd ever said to me. More intimate than sex, more intimate than blood, more intimate than violence. I said yes, and the ring felt heavy on my finger in a way that was comforting rather than oppressive. Matteo Cavalli Jr. was born on a Sunday. It was dramatic and terrifying and more painful than I could have possibly imagined, even after months of preparation. 18 hours of labor in a private medical suite that Matteo had apparently prepared for my arrival, with doctors who asked no questions, and nurses who treated me like I was the most important person in their world. Because, to Matteo, I was. He stayed with me through all of it, his hand gripping mine during contractions, his voice in my ear telling me I was strong. I could do this. The baby was almost here. When they put our son in my arms, a small, furious creature with dark hair and Matteo's mouth, I sobbed so hard I couldn't see properly. "He's perfect," I whispered. Matteo leaned down and kissed my forehead, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Fear. "He's going to inherit everything," he said quietly. The empire, the violence, the weight. We'll teach him better, I said. We'll teach him there are other choices. There are no other choices in this life, Piccola. But he took the baby from my arms and held him with the gentleness of someone who understands exactly how fragile new life is. He'll have to be strong, stronger than his mother, stronger than his father, strong enough to survive what I'm going to leave him. I didn't argue with him, though I wanted to. I was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by hormones and pain and love so fierce it felt dangerous. Matteo stayed with us through the night, never sleeping, just watching our son like he might disappear if he stopped paying attention. We named him Leonardo after his grandfather, the man who built the first empire. Matteo wore it like armor. The wedding happened 6 weeks later. I wanted something small, but Matteo insisted on tradition. So I wore a white dress designed by someone whose name I didn't know, and we exchanged vows in the same chapel where I'd first started to show, where he'd discovered me. I promise to protect you, he said, his eyes holding mine, to keep you safe from the world and from myself, to love you with everything I am, which is both darkness and light, and to never ask you to choose between them. I promise to love you, I said, exactly as you are, without trying to change you, without expecting you to be anything other than the man who saved me. When he kissed me, the entire chapel erupted, and I realized that we'd just made a binding agreement not just to each other, but to everyone in Matteo's world. I belonged to him. The child belonged to him. We were property and treasure simultaneously. After the reception, Matteo took me onto the terrace of the estate, the same terrace where he'd found me sick and broken and hopeless. 1 year ago, he said, you were hiding a secret you thought would destroy your life. Now you're carrying my name, and our son wears mine. Is that supposed to make me happy? No, he said. I don't think it makes you happy. I think it makes you safe. And at least for now, safety is what you needed. What about tomorrow? What about next year? What about when Leonardo is old enough to understand what his father really is? Matteo was quiet for a long moment. There will be more violence. There will be rivals and betrayals and moments when I have to make choices that will seem impossible. You'll hear about them. You'll see the cost in my face. And you'll have to decide every single day whether staying is worth the danger. That sounds like marriage, I said. It sounds like life with me. I stepped closer to him, and even in my wedding dress, even exhausted from 6 weeks of recovery and sleepless nights with a newborn, I felt the pull of him, the gravity that had never loosened, only deepened. I already decided, I said. I decided the night you kissed me in the courtyard. I decided when you came back covered in blood, and I didn't ask you to leave. I decided every time you held me, and didn't demand that I be something I'm not. You should have made better decisions. Probably, I agreed, but I would make the same ones again. He pulled me against him, and I felt the baby move in its carrier on the nearby table, and realized that my old life, the one of hiding and secrets and desperate, lonely pregnancy had been erased so completely it felt like it had belonged to someone else. Maybe it had. 2 weeks later, I woke to sirens again. This time, it wasn't Matteo who was in danger. It was his operation. One of his lieutenants had made a deal with a rival family, and Matteo's territory was being tested in ways it hadn't been in years. I heard him on the phone with his advisors, heard the careful precision in his voice as he explained how they would respond. He would not lose. He would never lose. But the cost would be high, and I would pay some of it just by being connected to him. I held Leonardo against my chest and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had become my prison and my home simultaneously. Your father is going to war, I whispered to our son. Not against people with swords, but against empires and ambitions and all the things that make this city dangerous. And you're going to grow up in the middle of that, whether we want you to or not. Leonardo made a small sound, and I pressed my lips to his dark hair and made a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I'll love him anyway, even when it costs me, even when it costs you, even when I can't see the end of it anymore. Below the window, Matteo's cars were leaving the drive, a convoy heading toward conflict and consequence. He'd been careful to hold me goodbye, to kiss Leonardo's forehead, to make sure we knew we mattered more than the empire he was about to defend. But we both knew that was a lie. The empire was everything. And I was simply the woman he'd chosen to keep in its center, pregnant and terrified and hopelessly in love with the man who'd taken every choice away from me and somehow given me more freedom than I'd ever had. In the distance, I heard more sirens, and I stood at my window, holding my son, waiting for the man I'd fallen in love with to come back from the violence that defined him, knowing he always would, knowing it would never truly be over, knowing that I would stay anyway. Because that's what it meant to love Matteo Cavalli. To love him was to love the danger, to embrace the darkness, to accept that there would be cost and blood and moments when I'd regret everything, and I'd do it again without hesitation.